the biggest political fight wasn't right versus left. It was right versus right. And once again, Israel and the Jewish people were dragged straight into the center of the storm. In Phoenix, Arizona, Turning Point USA's America Fest became a live stage for a conservative civil war. Ben Shapiro versus Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens, even though she wasn't welcome at the event. And hovering over everything like a dark cloud was the assassination of TPUSA founder Charlie Kirk and the conspiracy ecosystem that exploded in the vacuum created by that assassination. Because as the conservative movement mourns, a different movement is taking shape. A movement that doesn't just critique policy, it revives old, poisonous narratives and doesn't just debate Israeli policies, but smuggles anti-Semitism into the mainstream using America First language as the wrapper. On one side, there are voices insisting that the right must draw a hard line against anti-Semitism, even when it comes from our own team. And on the other side, there are voices saying, don't deplatform, don't denounce, don't police the movement. And if Israel is the reason this fight is happening, then Israel is the problem. And while all of this is happening in America's conservative space, something else is happening in parallel, and Israelis should be paying close attention. Tucker Carlson has been in Doha recently, interviewing Qatar's prime minister, talking about buying property in Qatar, and pushing narratives that Qatar desperately wants circulating throughout the West. We're talking about Qatar, the same state that hosts Hamas leadership, plays both sides of every conflict, and spends enormous amounts of money shaping what influential Americans hear, and perhaps, even more importantly, what they don't hear. So tonight, this is not a gossip segment, rather this is an Israeli national security segment, because when anti-Semitic conspiracies go mainstream in the United States, it doesn't stay online. It gets translated into pressure on elected officials at all levels, including the White House and Congress. It also gets applied in state assemblies and on state governments, and the mayors of big cities and in small towns. It finds its way into the boardrooms of corporations, and worst of all, it makes its way onto the campuses of universities and even primary schools. This pressure also finds its way into the streets, and it manifests in the protests in front of synagogues and Jewish community centers, putting Israel and Jews everywhere in danger. Welcome to this special edition of Boots on the Ground. I'm Mati Shoshani, and here at TBN Israel, we bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel. But tonight, we're also bringing you the full truth about what's happening in America, because that has a direct effect on us here in Israel. And we need you to pray for these issues, because the war against Israel is not only fought with rockets and terror tunnels, it's fought with narratives and propaganda. Increasingly, it's also fought through the normalization of anti-Semitism in places where many Jews once felt safer and where Israel once felt stronger support than it does today. So in this special edition, we're going to do three different things. First, we're going to lay out what happened at America Fest and why it matters for you. Second, we're going to map the Tucker Carlson-Candace Owens ideological ecosystem and how it intersects with anti-Israel messaging and anti-Semitic tropes. And third, we're going to explain why Qatar keeps showing up in this picture and why Israelis and their supporters should care. And at the end, I'll tell you what to watch next, because this is moving fast and 2026 is coming. Now, before we begin, I want to call on you to spread the truth, share this report, send it to your friends and influencers who you follow, as well as your elected officials at all levels, because Israel is fighting on the front lines against terrorism and against lies. Now, of course, if you haven't already, I also want to invite you to subscribe to this channel, because this story is not going away. Now, to start out, you have to understand that America Fest is not just another conference. It is one of the biggest annual gatherings of the activist conservative movement in the United States, and it has become the epicenter of political activity from online influencers, to fundraising networks, to grassroots organizing, and even presidential politics. Now this year, America Fest was not only political, it was also emotional. And emotions were as raw as they were fractured. The reason for all of this is it's simple, it's heartbreaking. Turning Point USA is no longer led by Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was assassinated in September at a public event on the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. The FBI has publicly confirmed it is investigating this event, and they have even arrested a suspect and released photos of the weapon he used and other details about him. But still, the conspiracy theories about what really happened have been flying fast and furious, including all kinds of ludicrous, absurd nonsense that have proven to be very popular. This is mixed with, and probably adds to, the very real grief that people feel when they lose someone they love. And we saw the collision of these two forces on stage in Phoenix. As the conference began, Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, tried to set a tone, attempting to smile through the chaos and describing America Fest like a family Thanksgiving where people are hashing out the family business. But what played out was far darker than awkward family debate, because when the movement's biggest microphones turned on, they didn't spend their time focusing on their ideological opponents on the left. They torched each other, and Israel was not a side topic, but one of the main triggers. On the America Fest stage, you had Ben Shapiro, the pro-Israel conservative commentator and founder of the Daily Wire media portal. There was also, of course, Tucker Carlson, arguably the most influential post-Fox voice in the conservative online ecosystem. Then there was Megyn Kelly, a powerful media figure, aligned socially with Tucker's orbit. And last, but certainly not least, there was Steve Bannon, a populist nationalist force attacking globalist and now increasingly attacking Israel-first conservatives. But behind the stage drama was a question larger than personalities, and that question was, and is, what is the future ideological identity of the American right? Is it a coalition where support for Israel is still a moral baseline? Or is it a coalition where Israel is recast as a liability and Jews become the symbol of foreign influence and globalist conspiracies? That's the line we're watching here in Israel. Because even if not every person in the crowd is anti-Semitic, the crowd doesn't have to be. All you need is a few influential voices, a few viral clips, and a few narratives that spread like an infection. And that's what this weekend looked like. Now let's take a look at perhaps the biggest fish in this pond, Tucker Carlson. To understand why Tucker Carlson is at the center of the story, you have to understand what he represents. He's not just a commentator, he's a platform and distribution engine. Tens of millions of people have outsourced their thinking to this man, hanging on his every word, inhaling his every thought, so they can repeat what he says word for word in an echo chamber that has few precedents in human history. That's a big problem, because Tucker Carlson has something that almost nobody else has. An audience that includes mainstream conservatives, skeptics, anti-establishment populists, and now increasingly people who flirt with extremist narratives, as long as those narratives are packaged as, "I'm just asking questions." Now, in my humble opinion, many of the people who follow Tucker Carlson must know on some level the catastrophically absurd conspiracy theories he's trafficking in our utter nonsense. But we're living through a season of human history when people want to believe things even if they know on some level that they couldn't possibly be true. Because facing the actual truth would be very painful, it would be difficult, and it would be expensive. So people go along with the nonsense, even though they know it's nonsense, because it's just easier. But the bitter harvest of taking this course of action are well known. As the 18th century French philosopher Voltaire said, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And nothing good ever comes from that, either from those who atrocities are committed against, nor for those who commit them themselves. Now, with that in mind, let's get back to Tucker Carlson. After leaving Fox News, Carlson built a new model of direct-to-audience media, fueled by viral internet clips, long interviews, and a style that sends a constant message to his viewers that everyone else is lying to you, but I'm the one who will say the quiet part out loud. That idea is powerful, just like all half-truths are, and it's especially dangerous when the quiet part becomes an old anti-Semitic script. Because over the last year or so, Carlson's content has repeatedly centered on presenting Israel as a problem inside American politics, not just as a foreign policy debate, but as a loyalty test for American conservatives. This idea came up repeatedly in Tucker's interviews and commentary, and then came the moment that really set off a civil war within the conservative movement. Tucker Carlson hosted 27-year-old Nick Fuentes, an unapologetic white nationalist who has millions of online followers, mostly angry, mostly frustrated, and very much confused young Caucasian men like himself who are searching for answers and not finding them anywhere else. Fuentes is widely described as an explicit anti-Semite and white nationalist influencer, and his brand has been built for years around a toxic formula. Take real frustrations, tie them to Israel, then tie Israel to the Jews, and then turn the Jews into an explanation for literally everything. Carlson brought Fuentes onto his show, but first, he framed the backlash in advance, essentially saying, people will call you a Nazi for talking to him. As if that was such a ridiculous idea that no serious person should take it seriously. This is an elegant and sadly very effective way to disarm a perfectly legitimate argument. But Carlson didn't stop there. During the conversation, Fuentes made the target explicit. When asked who should be taken down in the conservative movement, he answered, these Zionist Jews. That phrase matters, because it's not policy critique, such as I disagree with Netanyahu. It is identity targeting and collective blame. Also, it assumes that all Jews everywhere are Zionists, quote unquote, and thus legitimate targets. We've seen the fruit of this thinking from Sydney, Australia, to Paris, Los Angeles, and everywhere in between. This is the bridge from anti-Israel rhetoric to anti-Semitism, the bridge that extremist ideologues deliberately want you to cross. During the interview, Carlson, to his credit, tried to draw a distinction, claiming he's not interested in the Jews per se as an obsession, but in foreign policy. But in the same conversation, he also expressed sweeping hostility towards the US-Israel relationship, describing it as insane, saying it hurts us, and claiming we get nothing out of it. This last point is especially galling, because it's impossible that a man like Tucker Carlson, who worked for decades as a journalist covering international affairs, is unaware of the many benefits America gets from its relationship with Israel, in every field, from technology, medicine, security, and intelligence cooperation. But again, Carlson wasn't done. He also attacked Christian Zionists, not just disagreeing with them, but describing them in a way that signals contempt, mocking them as if support for Israel is a mind virus. To make a personal comment here, I think the real mind virus is biblical illiteracy. Because Tucker Carlson calls himself a Christian, but it's apparent that he has not read his Bible in a very long time. Anyone who does would be able to see very quickly how the God described in the Bible feels about Israel, the Jewish people, and especially my hometown, this city of Jerusalem. So what really happened here? It appears there is a pattern with that identifiable steps. Step number one is frame Israel support as irrational, corrupt, or manipulated. Step two is frame pro-Israel conservatives as traitors to their own country. And step three, of course, is invite an extremist who says the quiet part. It's the Jews. Step four, pretend the extremist is just a misunderstood truth teller. And then you call anyone who objects a censor who fears the truth and doesn't want people to know what's really going on. This is how radical narratives go mainstream. Not by marching in uniforms, by going on podcasts. And if you think I'm exaggerating, watch what happens next. The backlash didn't just come from Democrats and the ideological left. It came from prominent conservatives, and it split them. Ben Shapiro condemned it, but many others refused to condemn it, because Tucker's our guy. Some said they didn't like Fuentes, but supported Tucker's free speech agenda. Others treated the entire controversy as proof that Israel is a real wedge issue. And that, my friends, is the true problem here. Because the movement is now debating whether the moral line against anti-Semitism is optional as long as the anti-Semitism comes wrapped in a banner of America first. And in the middle of that debate, stands Tucker Carlson, powerful enough to set the tone and controversial enough to test whether the movement still has boundaries. Now I want to speak to you for a moment about one of our partners. In Israel, emergencies don't wait. It could be a rocket attack, a stabbing, a car ramming, or some kind of ordinary medical issue, like a heart attack or a baby ready to be born. It can happen anywhere, anytime. And when it does, Magen David Adom, or the Israeli Red Cross, or Red Star of David, is the first to respond. Before the cameras arrive, before the story breaks, they're already there, saving lives, calming chaos, and giving people a second chance. But staying ready takes more than courage. It takes ambulances, it takes medical equipment, it takes trauma supplies, trained volunteers, and armored protection. All of that takes support, and that's where you come in. Go to savelifeisrael.com. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com. Help Magen David Adom stay strong, fast, and prepared, so when the next emergency hits, they're already on the way. Now moving on, we also need to talk about Candace Owens, because if Tucker Carlson represents the platform, Candace Owens represents the pipeline. The pipeline goes like this. You start with legitimate criticism of policy, which is allowed in a free society. Then you add insinuations about hidden forces. Then add vague references to donors, networks, and media control. Then shift from talking about Israel to talking about the Jews. Then escalate to old religious and racial conspiracies. In a recent podcast, Candace Owens did exactly that. Let's ground this carefully. Candace Owens was once a major conservative star, including at the Daily Wire, where she worked in the same ecosystem as Ben Shapiro. But in March 2024, the Daily Wire publicly announced it ended its relationship with her after months of conflict and public controversy connected to Israel and anti-Semitism allegations. Now that's the background, but the bigger issue is what she's saying today and how she's saying it, because in her response to the TPUSA or America Fest conflict, she doesn't just attack Ben Shapiro personally, she uses language that hits multiple classic anti-Semitic tropes, the kind of tropes that have fueled real violence against Jews for centuries. I'm going to summarize the key themes, and I'm doing it this way on purpose, because our goal is not to amplify hate, our goal is to expose it. Now with that in mind, Owens repeatedly talks about Jewish donors pressuring people, threatening to withhold money, buying loyalty, controlling stages, controlling outcomes, and so on and so forth. Now in politics, and also in the media, donors exist. That's a real thing. But when you shift from specific criticism of a donor or a policy to a collective narrative that the Jews are the hidden force behind everything, that's not transparency. That's scapegoating. Another theme we hear coming up a lot in Candace Owens' recent podcasts is dual loyalty, which is a code word for American Jews being more loyal to Israel than to America. This is one of the oldest anti-Semitic accusations in history. The claim that Jews can't be loyal citizens because they're loyal to their own people first. In the transcript, Owens leans into that worldview. That Jewish identity implies a hidden agenda. That trope has been used against Jews in Europe, in the Soviet Union, and in modern extremist propaganda because it paints Jews as permanent outsiders and therefore fair game, who have only themselves to blame for any bad thing that anyone ever does to them. Owens also explicitly tells her audience to learn what is in the Talmud, and she asserts that Talmudic Jews view non-Jews as animals without a soul, and that Jews believe they have the right to lie, to deceive, and dominate these soulless non-Jews. This idea is not new, by the way. It's very old, but it has been recycled for a modern audience. For centuries, anti-Semitic polemics have misquoted Jewish texts, ripping lines out of context, mistranslating or outright fabricating quotes in order to claim Judaism is evil. That method was weaponized across Europe long before the Nazis, but the Nazis used similar strategies to say, look, their own books prove they are the enemy. The truth is, Judaism is a massive tradition with debate, interpretation, law, ethics, and argument across centuries. The claim that the Talmud teaches Jews can treat non-Jews as animals is a known anti-Semitic libel, and it is spread because it provides moral permission for hatred and violence against the Jews. Now moving on. In the transcript In the transcript, of this recent podcast, we see Owens uses language describing Jewish people as inherently backstabbing, even using dehumanizing imagery. Now, once again, dehumanization is not a rhetorical flourish. It's a step that always comes before violence. Because once you convince people the target is not fully human, you can justify anything. Now, once again, as Voltaire said, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Now we come to another idea that is totally ahistorical, but also very emotional. The idea that the Jews were responsible for the transatlantic trade slave in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries up until the US Civil War. This is one of the most toxic conspiracy theories that circulates online, and it is totally false. Yes, there were Jewish individuals that existed in many societies, including societies involved in slavery. That's historical reality. But the conspiracy claim that Jews controlled the slave trade is a distortion that historians have repeatedly rejected. But notice the rhetorical strategy. It weaponizes the real trauma of slavery to redirect anger away from actual systems and towards those mythical Jews. That's not justice, that is manipulation. Another absurd idea is gaining traction is that Jews control textbooks and propaganda to make white people destroy each other. This is another wrinkle in that classic canard that Jews are the hidden puppet masters who control media, education, and society, and who secretly orchestrate conflict for their own benefits. This is basically the modern version of the same worldview that drove the protocols of the elders of Zion thinking, the false idea of a global Jewish cabal controlling history. And finally, there's perhaps the most absurd idea of all. The Jews hate Jesus and Christians. Owens tells her audience in this recent podcast that the Christian thing doesn't work with Jews because Jews, this is her quote, hate Christ. This is a religious anti-Semitism, one of the oldest and most used tricks in the book. This is the kind of rhetoric that has fueled attacks on Jews for generations, long before the rise of fascism in Germany in the 1930s. Owens also repeatedly implies that Israel may be involved in 9/11, and that Israel, or the Mossad of course, may be linked to Charlie Kirk's murder, or to attempts at a cover-up. This is not reporting, guys. This is a conspiracy framework. And it's exactly the kind of framework that makes Jews less safe in America, because it tells millions of people when something terrible happens, look at Israel, look at the Jews. That's not truth. It's a script, and once again, I'm sure that most of the people who hear it know on some level that it's not true, but it's so easy to believe, instead of thinking critically and searching for the real truth. So the bottom line here is this. Owens is not simply criticizing Israeli policy. She's reviving a package of anti-Semitic narratives, and she's doing it in a moment when social media can turn those narratives into common knowledge inside an audience that trusts her. That is the danger. Now let's move to Ben Shapiro, because whether you like him or not, he did something on that stage at America Fest that few people do anymore. He drew a line. He went on stage shortly after Erica Kirk opened that very event, and he didn't give a generic speech. He named names. He attacked Candace Owens directly, saying she has been pushing conspiracy content. He also criticized Megyn Kelly for refusing to condemn those conspiracy claims, and he slammed Tucker Carlson for hosting Nick Fuentes, calling that decision morally bankrupt. Shapiro's argument is not complicated. If your movement cannot reject anti-Semitism when it comes from your own side, then your movement is compromised. And that is why his speech hit like a grenade. A lot of people in politics want the benefits of moral clarity without paying the price of confronting the loudest voices in their own camp. Shapiro has paid that price publicly, and what happened immediately afterwards proves how deep the fracture actually is. Tucker Carlson took the stage and mocked the entire concept of deplatforming and denouncing. He described Shapiro's speech as something he watched and laughed at. By the way, false humor, which is exactly an expression of derision and contempt, is also a weapon often used against Israel by both the left and the right. It's used a lot against Christians too, as I'm sure you're aware. But things got worse at America Fest, because the next night, Steve Bannon escalated the rhetoric even more, calling Shapiro like a cancer. Megyn Kelly responded too, ending their friendship and accusing Shapiro of trying to control who can speak and when. So this wasn't a simple disagreement. It was a power struggle inside the conservative movement over who gets to define the boundaries of acceptable speech. And Israel is sitting inside that very struggle like a pressure point. Because too many in that ecosystem defending Israel is no longer, or saying that Israel is no longer a moral instinct, is a signal that associating with the establishment. That means the people who defend Israel become targets of contempt, while the people who attack Israel get rewarded as brave truth tellers. That's the inversion of reality that we're watching play out right in front of our eyes. Now we get to the part that many Americans and also Europeans really don't want to talk about, because it forces a hard question. Is this purely an organic ideological shift, or is it also being shaped, nudged, funded, and amplified by foreign influence? I'm not just asking questions here, because Qatar keeps appearing in this story, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Now I want to be precise here, because Qatar is a sophisticated state actor. It's not an online troll or a random donor to this or that establishment. It's a government with strategic goals. And one of those goals is shaping the narrative environment in the West, especially on the American right. Now, why the political right? Because the American right has influence over the U.S. foreign policy, U.S. global military posture, including aid to allies, the strategy towards Iran, and the broader Middle East, and the diplomatic space around Gaza. Furthermore, Qatar's interests are complicated. It presents itself as a mediator, but it also maintains ties to Hamas and Iran. So Qatar's long-term objective is to be seen as indispensable while deflecting criticism of the forces it hosts or supports. And here's where it gets very relevant to our story. Reporting based on documents filed under the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act shows that Qatar's lobbying and media outreach has increasingly targeted conservative outlets and influencers, not only traditional lobbying in Washington. This includes media ecosystems, narrative production, story placement, and messaging discipline. According to documents cited in the reporting, a U.S. consulting firm, Lumen 8 Advisors, received a fixed monthly payment of $180,000 from the Qatari embassy in Washington. The contractual terms, as reported, are specific. It includes strategic communication consulting, media training, and regular work in Doha, and even requirements around travel class on Qatar Airways. Another firm cited in reporting, GRV Strategies, is described as receiving $80,000 per month from Qatar, again, through FAR-reported arrangements. Now I'm going to say something very clearly. This does not automatically prove Tucker Carlson is paid by Qatar. This is a separate claim, and it requires direct evidence. But it does prove something important. Qatar is spending serious money to shape the media environment in the US, including by cultivating access to influential conservative voices, influencers, and outlets. And then you get the coincidence factor, because one of the most visible public relation wins for Qatar was an interview Tucker Carlson conducted recently with Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, which reportedly drew massive online attention. And then we saw Tucker Carlson physically present at the recently held Doha Forum, discussing Qatar in front of a live audience. At this event, Carlson addressed the accusations directly, saying he has been criticized as being a tool of Qatar, but he denied taking money in exchange for anything, apparently expecting to be taken at his word just because he's Tucker Carlson, and that's the way it is. Then he announced he was buying real estate in Qatar, saying he's doing it to prove he's an American and a free man who can be wherever he wants. That statement is extraordinary, not just because someone bought property, but because it signals something deeper. Carlson is normalizing Qatar as a respectable partner at exactly the moment Qatar is fighting to protect its reputation in the West. And what did Qatar's Prime Minister say in that same setting? He defended Qatar's relationship with Hamas by claiming Qatar was asked by the US and Israel to engage. He also criticized Israel's actions in Gaza, while the entire conversation framed Qatar as the rational actor and Israel as the destabilizing force. Now think about narrative impact. In a world where many young conservatives already feel suspicious of institutions, suspicious of foreign wars and alliances, it's not difficult to insert Israel into that suspicion. If you take a look at online discussions by these young conservatives, various phrases keep coming up, like Israel is dragging us into wars, or Israel controls policy, Israel is not Western, and Jews don't even believe in Jesus. And last but not least, Israel is the reason we're censored. That is the emotional logic, and it spreads faster than facts. Now connect it back to America First. At the America Fest, Israel was discussed repeatedly, not just as a policy, but as a controversy inside the movement. Some attendees highlighted the US Liberty incident on 1967, not as a complex and unfortunate historical event that happened a long time ago while the people responsible are long gone, but as a weapon against Israel, which should be considered highly relevant today. Now that incident has become a symbol to suggest Israel is not an ally of America, but rather an enemy hiding in plain sight. And Steve Bannon used explicitly loaded language accusing Shapiro and others of being Israel first. And for those of you who don't know, Google it. It's a very unfortunate event where Israel accidentally struck a U.S. ship during the 1967 Six-Day War, harming U.S. personnel and a ship in an unintentional way. Again, this is used by the conspiracy theorist peddlers as a show of Israel's disloyalty or unalignment with the United States. That incident has become a symbol to suggest Israel is not an ally of America, but rather an enemy hiding in plain sight. And Steve Bannon used explicitly loaded language accusing Shapiro and others of being Israel first. That's not a neutral phrase. It's a rebranding of a dual loyalty accusation. And then, on the same weekend, you have Candace Owens pushing claims about Jewish donors, about hidden Jewish networks, about Talmudic evil, about Jews controlling slavery, about Jews controlling textbooks. And you have Tucker Carlson giving a stage to Fuentes, who says the common denominator is Jewishness and labels Zionist Jews as the enemy. Now, when you zoom out, you see something. Israel is not just being criticized, it's being used as the gateway for a much older hatred. While Qatar benefits from this environment because the more Israel is isolated inside American politics, the more Qatar can position itself as a responsible mediator, a responsible actor, and the adult in the room. Now here's the Israeli point. This is not about winning a PR argument. This is about whether Israel's security partnership with the United States remains stable and whether American Jews remain safe. Because when foreign influence, conspiracy and economics, and anti-Semitic tropes merge inside a major political coalition, you don't just get bad opinions, you get policy consequences, a weakened alliance, and you get a rising risk of anti-Semitic violence all over the world. So where do we go from here? First, let's anchor ourselves in reality. Anti-Semitism in the United States is not a fringe problem anymore. It is measurable, becoming part of the mainstream conversation, and it's becoming more popular. The Anti-Defamation League has reported record levels of anti-Semitic incidents in recent years, while FBI hate crime reporting has also shown that anti-Jewish hate crimes remain a major share of religiously motivated hate crimes. So when you see viral conspiracies involving Jews, Israel, Mossad donors, hidden control, don't treat it just like the internet, because the data says it doesn't stay on the internet. Now, from Israel's viewpoint, the biggest strategic concern is not one influencer, it's the direction of the coalition. Historically, the Republican Party has been Israel's most consistent base of support, especially through evangelical Christian Zionists and national security conservatives. But the American First realignment is changing the balance, and the right is now split at least three major impulses. Impulse 1, the pro-Israel conservative base. This is still very real. It includes large Christian Zionist organizations, many evangelicals, and many traditional conservatives who see Israel as a moral ally and a strategic ally. They're not silent, but they often don't fight online the way influencers do. Impulse 2, the populist nationalist bloc. This bloc is skeptical of foreign aid. It's skeptical of alliances and intervention. That skepticism is not automatically anti-Semitic, but it becomes dangerous when Israel is singled out as uniquely suspicious, and when anti-Israel talking points are fused with Jews control America insinuations. Impulse 3, the extremist fringe that wants to steer the mainstream. This is where Fuentes fits and where conspiracy entrepreneurs thrive. This is where Israel is not a policy debate, It's a recruiting tool for hatred. And here's the crucial point. The mainstream always thinks it can use the fringe, but history shows that fringe tries to use the mainstream, and it often succeeds because it's willing to say the most extreme thing for attention, and it's also willing to get violent, first with words, then with actions, and that's something many people are not willing to confront. Now, what should Israelis watch? Watch point 1, 2026, and the price tag politics of Israeli support. As America moves towards the midterm elections in November 2026, you'll see pressure campaigns around foreign aid, defense funding, and Iran's strategy. Israel could become a wedge issue in Republican primaries, especially if candidates believe attacking Israel wins them attention online. Another point to watch point 2, the Israel first language creeping into respectable spaces. When major figures normalize language that frames pro-Israel Americans as disloyal, that's not just rhetoric, it's a permission structure for anti-Semitism. Watch point 3, the foreign influence conversation. If Qatar is investing in conservative media influence, and if that influence aligns with narratives that isolate Israel, then Israel needs to track it, understand it, and address it. Not with paranoia, but with transparency and facts. Watch point 4, the Christian Zionist backlash. There's a quiet but powerful force in American politics, and that force is Christian Zionist. When Tucker Carlson attacks and slanders Christian Zionists, he's not just insulting a group, he's threatening a pillar of Republican support for Israel. And if that pillar wavers, much less fractures, Israel feels it. Watch point 5, the conspiracy market. After Charlie Kirk's assassination, political violence creates a vacuum and conspiracy narratives rush in because they monetize fear. Owen's claims in this recent podcast are a textbook example of that monetization model of keeping the audience in permanent suspicion, emotionally activated and wanting to come back for the next reveal. That's not journalism, guys. That's an industry built on fear, anger, paranoia, and hate, and it can radicalize people quickly. Now, I want to end with the most important takeaway. This is not about silencing debate. That is the mother of all red herrings. Israel can be debated, policies can be debated, and governments can be criticized. That's completely normal. But the moment someone shifts from criticizing policy to demonizing Jews as a collective, the moment they start using tropes about Jewish control, Jewish conspiracy, Jewish subhuman nature, Jewish religious evil, and etc., the moment they tell people Jews are behind slavery, behind textbooks, behind propaganda, behind assassinations, behind 9/11 even, and everything else you can imagine, that is not politics or even criticism. That's hatred, and it has consequences. So our responsibility, all our responsibility, as Israelis, as Jews, as Christians who love Israel, as honest, civilized people, is to name the lie, expose the script, and defend the truth. Because in the end, Israel doesn't just need Iron Dome. Israel needs narrative defense. Israel needs allies who can tell the difference between criticism and demonization. And Israel needs moral clarity, especially when the hatred is coming from places that claim to be our friends. So here at TBN Israel, we're going to keep tracking this history and this story because a conservative civil war over Israel and anti-Semitism is not ending. It's escalating. And as it escalates, it will shape real policy, it will shape elections, and it will shape American Jewish safety and Israel's strategic environment. So please, share this report, be an ambassador of truth, subscribe to TBN Israel so you stay tuned to the truth in real time, and never miss an episode of Boots on the Ground. Once again, I'm Mati Shoshani, and this has been a special edition of Boots on the Ground, bringing you all the truth about what's happening in Israel and what's happening to Israel. Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel